Donald Trump and Elon Musk's domestic agenda became much easier to understand this week. Now they talk a lot about waste and fraud and abuse. Yes, we do hear them talk about it. And they've created a bogus new government agency that's supposedly making the government more efficient. But it seems that's just marketing. It seems it's a cover story. As we said last week, for all of Trump's fake populism, he is continuing the American corporate elite's 40-plus-year class war on the working class and poor in America. And this week's House GOP budget, which could slash Medicaid funding by as much as $880 billion, is Exhibit A. Nearly 80 million Americans are covered by Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program. Medicaid covers nearly 4 in 10 American children. So why do this? What's the gain? Why would the man who was the first Republican to win the working class vote in decades crush the government-backed health care plan that covers 41% of all births in the U.S., nearly half of all children with special needs, and 5 in 8 nursing home residents? Why? To cut the deficit? No, of course not. Because the House Republicans are also working to extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts for the rich. And that will cost $4.5 trillion. And obviously raise the deficit that Republicans used to pretend to care about. And Exhibit B in Trump's so-called class war this week? His gold card visa plan. We know how hostile Trump is to immigrants, but it seems, and we now have a clearer idea, not all immigrants, wealthy foreigners with $5 million to be specific, would be able to purchase permanent residency in the United States under Trump's new proposal. So whether it's his budget priorities or his immigration priorities, there is one common denominator. This is simply government of the rich, for the rich, and by the rich. But these policies aren't popular. There will be political cost to anyone in the GOP who supports them. A poll by Hart Research this week showed that 71% of Trump voters said cutting Medicaid would be unacceptable. Overall, 82% of voters oppose it. We're already seeing some Republican lawmakers starting to squirm at the idea of going back to their districts and having to explain why the MAGA movement just took away their health care. It is a third rail. And speaking of third rails, first buddy Elon Musk is now getting close to one. This is what he had to say to Joe Rogan yesterday about Social Security.
So, Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Right, explain that.
Oh, so, well, people pay into Social Security, and the money goes out of Social Security immediately, but the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. So you're paying with you're paying like if you look at the future obligations of Social Security, it far exceeds the tax revenue. Far. Have you ever looked at the debt clock?
That is an incoherent answer. It's nonsense. It doesn't even explain, nor does it accurately describe what a Ponzi scheme actually is. And it's kind of surprising that Elon Musk would not know that. While trying to convince Joe Rogan, it is actually frightening to 20 million Americans who are lifted out of poverty every year thanks to Social Security, and to the rest of us who pay into it and want to see it continue to help the elderly in America not go broke. It still does matter. When he first ran for office in 2015, Donald Trump pretended to be a different type of Republican. And 10 years later, and we all know that's not the case. While he's promised to never cut Medicaid and never cut Social Security, he has turned the government over to this man, his top donor, the world's richest man, and someone who thinks that the backbone of America's social safety net for the past century is nothing more than a Ponzi scheme. And to this man, the head of the Office of Budget and Management, Russ Vought of the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank that has been gunning for Social Security for decades. These policy ideas, if enacted, will hurt millions of people. The social safety net in this country is already pitiful compared to other wealthy Western nations. These policies must be confronted. If only there were a political party willing to fight for the other side in this class war. Kicking us off this hour, Francesca Fiorentini, comedian and co-host of American Unhinged on YouTube, and Amara Jones, founder and CEO of Translash Media. It's good to have both of you with us. Francesca, it's not just Medicaid, SNAP benefits are also now on the chopping block. Do Republicans not see how unpopular these cuts will be with their voting base, or do they simply not care?
I think it's the latter. I think that they know the class war is on, and unless they actually meet opposition from the Democratic Party or from the people in the streets or through the ballot box, they're going to keep doing whatever they're doing, which is, again, a mnemonic tube sucking the money from the poorest to the richest, to people who are straight up right now trying to write off their private jets. That was happened in the first Trump tax cuts. If they are made completely permanent, that's what they're going to do. I guess my thing is this, Eamon, and I think this is what we have to talk about. There's no going back to normal discussions about the deficit. The deficit has always been a false flag, red herring distraction. Whenever we actually talk about things like universal health care, whenever we actually talk about something like a Green New Deal that gives people jobs but also addresses the climate chaos, the answer is what's it going to do? The deficit. How's it going to add to the deficit? I don't ever want to hear a Democrat ever again say the word deficit, because you see these plutocrats, you see these oligarchs just straight up, when they get into power, adding $4.5 trillion so they can write off their private jets. Excuse me. And lastly, the reason we're here is because of the amount of money that is flowed into our political system, and because Democrats, sadly, have often capitulated to the framing that, yes, these so-called entitlement programs are the reasons that we're here. And, well, we should try and find ways to make Social Security more solvent. Oh, maybe we should cut a little bit of Medicaid, or maybe we should have work requirements, even though the majority of people on Medicaid already work. Like, it is all the capitulation that has led us down this primrose path to plutocracy.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about the framing of this. The Democrats continuously fall into the framing that Republicans want to create for them on this issue, and they need to look beyond that. Amar, do you think we will actually see a divide within the Republican Party on this budget? The Musks and Trumps of the world are obviously not in touch at all with the needs of the working class and working poor. But a lot of House Republicans acknowledge that they have a lot of their constituents who depend and who rely on all of these programs to get by. And they have to go back to those districts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're going to see is a tremendous amount of tension, but the question is whether or not that tension is going to manifest in votes. I mean, this is the tension at the heart of the Republican Party right now, which is even on something like Medicaid, other government programs, that it's going to be, to use a phrase, the people versus the powerful. And we know that so far the powerful are winning out. And we know that for two reasons. We know, according to Vanity Fair, that members of Congress are afraid of political violence that has increased with the release of Proud Boys. I mean, these essentially constitute, a private army, for lack of a better word or phrase, that is sort of on the side of the president of the United States, that has stoked real fears on people who within his own party stand up and vote against their interest. And there's been a tremendous hoovering up of information by Elon Musk that can be weaponized against them as well. And so, this combination of the possibility of political violence and sort of this digital hoovering up, digital authoritarianism, and the weaponization of that information constitute a real threat to democracy overall. I mean, these are essentially weapons of mass destruction that have been unleashed on our democracy. And so far, they're having a really deleterious effect. And we wouldn't have even gotten this far. I mean, so many of the people, for example, who were voted and confirmed upon as secretaries of the cabinet wouldn't have made it without this kind of twin threat that's out there. So there is this hidden force that's at work in democracy right now. And I think that it raises real questions of whether or not the normal process of something like this that would impact constituents, we know that red states disproportionately benefit from Medicaid, whether or not, those normal forces are able to work because of what we've unleashed in American democracy right now.
Francesca, I want to go back to a point that you touched upon, and that's the Democrats in this, because Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these are some of the biggest social and political achievements in America over the past 100 years, all passed by Democrats. Why can't the party that got these done, that created this social safety net, that has sustained millions upon millions of Americans for decades. Why are they not able to basically rebuild their image around these programs, their expansion, their modernization, their reform, but at the core maintain what these programs are about and what they do for the American people?
I mean, I think that's a really good question. There's a number of ways to answer that. I mean, one of them is not wanting to piss off their corporate donors, right? If they're going to receive money from folks who are really, reliant on things like SNAP benefits or social safety nets, companies like Walmart, who, many of the employees who work there are also relying on SNAP benefits. Why is that? Maybe it's because they don't pay a living wage for people to actually afford rent and food and gas and childcare, on and on and on. So that's one thing. But I think if there's a silver lining about Donald Trump, it's that he breaks things that everyone's like, oh, yeah, that was kind of important. And the real thing with Democrats is you have to be messaging on this stuff all of the time. Instead, they allow it to become the sort of, let's talk about pay-go. How are you going to pay for it? We'll put it in a budget bill. We'll nibble around the edges. No, just if you're not expanding the social safety net, what have you been doing for the last 40 years? As you rightly said, the other side has been planning on dismantling it, right? Yeah. And the whole thing of third rail, no, man. Third rail been touched, all right? They are like electrifying. They're toasting their testicles over on that third rail. That's like some Tucker Carlson stuff over there. They love it because they know they're not going to get the fight back. And I do think the point about political violence is well taken and needs to be understood more.